This is the Liberal Europe podcast by ELF, bringing liberal ideas into the political debate, with Leszek Jazdzewski and Ricardo Silvestre.
Hello and welcome to Liberal Europe. My name is Leszek Jazdzewski and I have a great privilege today to talk to the good friend who is also a Kosovo ambassador in Warsaw, Drilon Gashi, who grew up and spent a lot of time in the United States and private sector, who studied at the Columbia University, but we mostly talk about Kosovo and EU affairs today. Drilon, welcome very warmly to the Liberal Europe podcast.
Really good to be on the podcast with you, Leszek. You could have actually just said fond visitor of Łódź as just an introduction. I think it would have been comprehensive.
Thank you for those kind words about my hometown. Listeners to this podcast, they know that I am even currently recording this from Łódź, and Drilon was just a couple of days ago. But don't worry, we're not going to spend all the podcast talking about my city. I want to ask you first, Drilon, what are the things that, in your experience, people misunderstand about Kosovo the most?
Thanks for that question. I think a starting point for people when they hear about Kosovo is, this is a complex place with a complex history, and that can sort of maybe keep folks from getting more interested in the place, or from having clear views with regards to Kosovo. I think that's one thing. And then the other thing is the fact that our war, now 26 years ago, is still fresh in the minds of people's perceptions of Kosovo. And so they interpret us only through this political, historical lens. And whilst the war is a very important part of our history and our heritage, we're much more than that war, as we've discussed oftentimes. And so we like to share all the things that make us interesting and distinct, that go beyond just that history, and particularly that present things we're very proud of in our history, but the future, what it holds for us, and how we're quite ambitious living in this time period of our independence about our future.
Right. Speaking of which, the Kosovo was very closely aligned with the West during the full-scale invasion of Ukraine by Russia. Can you tell us a bit more how the Kosovo sees its place in the broader European security architecture?
Certainly. In a way, Kosovo was the recipient before of great support from the West, politically, militarily, and in terms of values. I don't think that we would be independent today had it not been for the fact that there was a great consensus within the countries typically seen as the West, the US, leading European nations, and what they thought would be the right outcome for us in terms of our political status, but also our place in Europe and the world. And so, for us, Ukraine was this and the Russian aggression on Ukraine was this opportunity to actually speak with a voice of support, maybe for the first time as an independent country, on an issue that was very close to home for us as well. And so we, our leadership, our President Vjosa Osmani, Prime Minister Albin Kurti, namely, but also across society, have been vocally very supportive of Ukraine. We've offered, for the first time, I think, an extensive program such as housing up to 5,000 refugees of Ukraine in Kosovo. That's maybe a small number if we think about Poland or other places in Europe, but for us, it's the largest commitment we've ever made to such a program. And because of the fact that 1 million Kosovars themselves were refugees right after the war, at least 1 million, probably much more than that. This hit close to home in terms of our identity. And what was really important was the fact that Ukraine was a country that either did not take a stance on Kosovo's independence or might have not been friendly to our cause, but that played no role in either the political or, I would say, the public support for Ukraine, which I thought was also uplifting. So if you visit Pristina, which I know you recently have, you see the Ukrainian flag draped on the Grand Hotel in Kosovo, which is the most central location in our capital city, and it stays there proudly. And so we continue to support Ukraine, and we're trying to use our voice as well to say this is a moment for strengthening the European security architecture. So we know in NATO recently there was an endorsement of more spending on defense by all EU countries, but we think this moment's about recommitting for countries that are part of that infrastructure today, but also being open to more countries joining the European and NATO security infrastructure. And so that has to be, I think, Ukraine, Kosovo, and other places who are pursuing that either in the east of Europe or the south of Europe.
Right. Thank you for this explanation. I wanted to ask you a little bit from your own personal experience. How, when you joined the foreign service, what is it like to navigate the foreign policy for the country with still limited international recognition? And what are the strategies that Kosovo is pursuing to gain more recognition globally, but also on the European stage, where there are still 5 countries who within EU don't recognize Kosovo independence?
Right, and so our we're now in the 17th year of independence. We're about at 120 global recognitions by countries. We've joined many of the international financial institutions. We are hoping to start joining the major European institutions, starting with Council of Europe, and of course, eventually the European Union, and then the United Nations as well. And so there are a few reasons why we've had to pursue this, let's say, unique route of individual and group recognitions. I think first and foremost, unfortunately, is due to Russia sort of backing away from a peace process in which they were also invested in the future status of Kosovo, and then sort of playing, unfortunately, the spoiler to our efforts at joining the UN in particular and other agencies. So I think the onus is really on all of our, ambassadors and diplomats, Leszek, to first of all, have some thick skin. Don't get discouraged by the fact that we're not always invited to the clubs or parties, but we can't let that make us let up. We've got to be very committed, very active, and so I've tried to show that in my role in Poland here is that this is it's a great privilege. So you can see the challenges of working for a country that's trying to consolidate its role in the global stage, but it's also a great privilege to have a say in a pivotal point in your country's history. And so that's what gets me excited daily here in working to have very strong relations with Poland, but also represent Kosovo across bilateral and multilateral initiatives that are happening in Poland, where you're often engaging with all countries in Europe or many countries in the world. And so I would say generally, yes, we have some perhaps specific challenges, but it's all the more reason for us to try to stand out. And I think what I've noticed, when I was in Washington from our embassy there, and when I've had the chance to, speak with fellow colleagues who are in our foreign services, that we do try to set ourselves apart in being active and being innovative and really trying to draw positive attention to our country. And so maybe the challenges have actually led us to have an above average diplomatic and foreign service. But we have to keep that up because we still have a lot to achieve. I think one of the main goals for me in joining our foreign service was we want to be a member of the EU and NATO, but we have to make it so. And so, the more people who join that effort and push forward our country's major initiatives, the closer we'll get there. And we will achieve that. Independence was hard to achieve, and we got there. So I think we'll achieve joining these very important institutions as well.
I really admire this purpose-driven spirit of yours, and I want to ask you about the hurdles and obstacles to the EU membership. Because being in Pristina, as you mentioned, you can see that people are using euro already, and that in many ways the accession of country with less than I mean, around 1.5 million people, right, in the Kosovo itself. Shouldn't be such a problem. And EU is already invested a lot in the Kosovo anyway. What are the main obstacles, except the recognitions, of course, which we discussed already?
Right. So, and just a quick point on the recognitions is, of course, to become a member of the EU, you have to sort of state your case across all EU members so that they can support numerous milestones for you across the process. Unfortunately, I think the fact that 5 countries still don't recognize this means uh, also, unfortunately, that they don't support sort of progress in our EU integration process. And so that's and we we realize that, and we try to work on it in the sense that us becoming closer to the EU shouldn't prejudge that decision for now, and has some good benefits anyway, both for our country, but also for us as a potential partner, economic and otherwise, for the union. And so we're hoping for ways so that we can kind of unlock the process, that we keep joining, and then make this sort of a penultimate decision for these countries, recognition when we're much closer to actually joining the EU. That's on the one side. I think in terms of the other aspects of our reform process, I think we've been doing quite well, especially recent years in reform, which is great. So that shows in terms of the EU progress reports that are drafted each year, and other indicators throughout the year, and that's been lauded recently by Commissioner Marta Kos, and also mentioned at higher levels by President of the European Commission von der Leyen, in terms of our economic progress. So I think a lot of those very objective metrics are positive for us now. But there's that third additional factor, which is our bilateral relationship with Serbia. This is, of course, any countries that are looking to join the EU have to settle their any bilateral disputes in the process. I think here there is progress. There is progress on that front, although it's very popular, oftentimes for there not to be, and so we have to sort of fight against those perceptions. But the thing to consider there is that sometimes leaving 2 countries to their own devices as a prerequisite to joining the EU, rather than really bringing them closer and having that be a true carrot EU integration for the 2 countries to also get along better in terms of political relations. I think we have to think about that more, and perhaps there are ways to, in our case, bring Kosovo and Serbia closer to the EU, and then that itself provide the impetus that's needed to get past remaining bilateral hurdles.
Right. Speaking of which, we see a lot of protests recently in Belgrade and elsewhere. Um, and I wonder to what extent you see it as opportunity, because it might change the sort of autocratic course of Serbia in the recent years. To what extent Serbia being seen as an enemy, let's say, of the West might be actually work in favor of Pristina European perspective, because people will be less concerned with Serbia, and to what extent, perhaps, as you sort of hinted in your last answer, your future is sort of interlinked. So you have to keep fingers crossed for Serbia, even if Serbia is not keeping fingers crossed for you, because without uh, their success, your success will be also impossible, because European Union, but also I think US, sort of requires 2 countries to get together in some way. How do you see, maybe not how you personally, but how it is seen from the perspective of the country, the developments in Serbia and the Serbia political future?
Yeah, I think, officially, our government and our leadership has been cautious in terms of weighing in and having a lot of opinions with the ongoing protests in Serbia, across Serbia. But I think, what I can say in terms of Kosovo's perception is, you can probably find a consensus among our people in that, we see more democracy, more rule of law in Serbia as being good. for Kosovo as well, and actually being good even more broadly than our bilateral relationship, being good with Serbia's relations across the region. And and that directly relates as well to Serbia's EU perspective, because a more democratic Serbia with greater rule of law is also much more likely to be in favor of joining the European Union, where it sees otherwise itself as having a natural position. And so, I think it's, the protests have been incredibly resilient. They've been ongoing now, I think, for about a year, and they've found a way to maintain their voice in an otherwise very difficult environment to do so. But it'll be interesting to see what kind of lasting impact they have. I think more active civil society is certainly a good outcome of this, and that seems to be something that's being well maintained. And let's see if it changes the course politically of Serbia from within. As you mentioned, certainly there's a relationship then of these internal developments to our relationship with Serbia, and then both of our paths to the EU, and they are linked. However, I think it's important to have a linkage to all countries in the region that are looking to pursue the European Union, but not to the point where one is being fully held back due to the lack of will by the other. And so it's sort of an in-between scenario. You want the region to move in a certain direction, but you don't want, inadvertently one country to act as a spoiler for the other. And so, we often emphasize with European and other publics that, we have 97% support for EU membership. We don't have any anti-EU political parties. I think what's important is we don't have any anti-Kosovo Serb political parties either. And so, we have a positive moment in our liberal democracy, and we hope for that to be sort of encouraged and supported, and not, if I can say, not taken for granted, because as we've seen elsewhere, if that happens for too long, then maybe we won't be able to always tout such progressive statistics. So I think really, it is in the interest of the entire region. You mentioned Kosovo being, a population of 1.6 million today. The region altogether is about 17 million, and so it's smaller than a mid-sized EU country. And so the benefits far outweigh the risks of thinking about, the entire Western Balkans joining, and particularly for those countries that are very persistent in both wanting to join and making the efforts to join.
So I wanted to end or on a sort of maybe personal note, and to get into the challenges and opportunities that you pursue as an ambassador in Warsaw. I know you've been very active, incredibly active. This is how we basically met, and I must say that we also hoping at the Freedom Games, which most of our listeners know, some of them been there, that for the very strong Kosovo presence, maybe even of Prime Minister Albin Kurti at the panel about the strengthening through peace. Can the world still learn from solidarity and non-violent movements? So I wanted to ask you a sort of broader question to end about your recent work here in Warsaw, but also about this message from the Kosovars to the wider world, also about your fight for independence, also how your prime minister was involved. Many of the people were involved in fighting for your own state quite recently, not in the 19th century, not in the 20th century, but even then as well. But I mean, quite recently, what is this experience for, how this experience is really transforming the population, and how this message can resonate throughout the world from the Kosovo?
Thanks very much for that point, and I'll just emphasize this, that it is, I'm very happy that we've worked together, and I've had the chance to work with you, and that we will have Prime Minister Kurti in Łódź this year for Freedom Games. And so I think, it'll be a great event, an opportunity for us to engage through what's an excellent conference that you lead there. And of course, we'll come up with some unique ideas while he's in Łódź as well for other activities. So asking folks who are listening to stay tuned. In terms of recent work in Warsaw, I was thinking about it recently, Leszek, and I can honestly say there is nowhere that I would rather represent my country than in Warsaw, Poland. And I say that with full sincerity and with all due respect to Washington, Paris, and some great capitals around the world, as well as capitals on the Far East, because of the fact that this is an incredibly important relationship for us in many ways, because of I think a very principled position of Poland to Kosovo, which has been consistent. But I think now we're just scratching the surface in terms of a very productive bilateral relationship we can form. And so I see my role as really making as solid as possible foundation for a special relationship between Kosovo and Poland. And that might not be what many people thought about this relationship a few years ago, but I think we can get there. And so I'm fully committed to that. With all my being committed to that relationship. And I want to tie it to this question you have about us, being in this time where we're focused on consolidating our independence, fighting still for our independence abroad. I have a lot of inspiration from Poland's example. Poland is very familiar with having to reestablish its independence about a century ago, and then having to restore it again 30 years ago. And so I think our message, our plight actually resonates here in Poland quite strongly, especially when they hear more about the specifics of our history, our cause, our legal right to independence, all of the above. And so I think that's important. And so, it's really important across this part of Europe. And I think it's often because of this great understanding of the fight for political independence and the fight for one's culture and one's identity being paramount. I mean, this is the fight of Ukraine against Russian aggression today. I think it's important that it not be lost how important this experience is to our friends further west, and why then joining the EU and NATO is particularly important, because it sort of reestablishes the independence, the identities, safeguardings of culture that certain countries have to continuously fight for and defend. Unfortunately, that's sort of the fate sometimes you have, and you try to adjust things so that it becomes easier in the future. And so for us, the prime minister that we mentioned, he was a student protest leader. He was a political prisoner of Serbia. So he has, experienced in his own skin, in many ways, what it really means for us to be on this journey towards freedom and independence. Similar experiences by our president as well, and this generation of people living, and then of course, older generations who were involved in the struggle and really, perhaps never thought that we would have this chance. And so I think, going back to some of your initial questions, I think this serves to redouble the efforts of anyone involved in representing our country and in wanting to further our ambitions, is knowing that many were here before us trying to do the same thing in other capacities, perhaps not in diplomacy, and many will be thereafter. And so for this time that we have the baton, we have to make a great effort forward. And so I think for, I try to encourage my colleagues and others who want to get involved in diplomacy for Kosovo is, sure, it comes with challenges, but I think therein lies the opportunity to have a small positive impact in the course of history of your country. And so, I hope more people ascribe to that and more people join these efforts.
Well, Drilon, I think this is a really good place to end, and to keep in mind the value of sovereignty and independence, and not taking this for granted. And what a great privilege it is to work for your country, which managed to establish itself. I think it's a very unique experience that very few people ever had in their lives. Some people in Poland had 100 years ago. So I think why so many can sort of understand your position that you are in. Drilon, Gashi, thank you so much for being with us at the Liberal Europe today.
A great pleasure for me. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Drilon. That's all for today from me, Leszek Jazdzewski. Please tune in for Ricardo Silvestre next week. Until 2 weeks. Goodbye.
You were listening to the Liberal Europe podcast by the European Liberal Forum. This podcast was co-financed by the European Parliament.